Okay, I think everybody has arrived or is arriving, so we'll go ahead and get started with the next session of the pre-conference, which is crawl, walk, or run to retirement. Some of us are running a little bit faster than others, and we're going to have, we're supposed to have 3 different panelists today who are going to present. Each one of them has developed their own PowerPoint, and all of the slides or handouts that will be presented in the session today, you can find on the main conference page. If you have any problems with that, just contact the Ewald or Iarp staff and we'll help with that. We have question and answer and chat both open throughout the entire session. We'll probably handle the questions towards the end, but as a question comes to you, if you want to go ahead and populate that, then we'll make sure to get it to our panelists before the conclusion. Right now we have 2 of the 3 presenters on the screen. So our 3 presenters today are supposed to be Mr. Bob Taylor, Dr. Leslie Friels-Lloyd, and Mr. David Patsavis. I'll give a brief introduction to all 3 of them. Mr. Taylor has had some conflict in his schedule, and I think he's going to be joining us. But if not, Leslie is going to go ahead and begin her session, and then we'll move to the other 2 speakers. So let me tell you who's here with us. You've probably already heard from Dr. Leslie Lloyd today. She has a doctorate degree in rehab counseling and is a certified both through CRC and ABVE. She's been practicing a few years. She's been in private practice since 1995. Bob Taylor, who we all likely know, has been in practice through vocational diagnostics since 1984. And if he was here, I was going to tease him and say that that was a year after I was born, but the joke falls flat when he's not here for me to say that, and it's not true. We also have Mr. David Patsavis, who's been in private practice through independent rehabilitation services through 1990. He's worked in vocational counseling and rehab for over 30 years and started this company that I just mentioned to you over 25 years ago. I think the order for the day, if I'm not mistaken, is we're going to start with Dr. Lloyd and then move to our other 2 speakers, and you'll see her slides on the screen. Feel free to ask questions throughout. I'll be monitoring that. For now, I'm going to go offline and turn it over to Dr. Lloyd. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Tanya. I did receive a message from Bob, and he will be coming on shortly. So we can go ahead and do my session, and then we can go into Bob's if he's here by then. This is an interesting topic, and I'm really pleased to be able to discuss it. I'm really not that close to retirement, or at least I hope I'm not. But one of the key things that I learned from the CRCC survey is that we need to plan ahead. And so I hope to plan ahead. Here's what we will be discussing today in my part of the session. This is just my part. I'm going to share with you some frightening statistics and then some not so frightening statistics, some key factors to consider when you're approaching retirement. And then I'm going to share my story as well. So one of the things that I found very interesting was a study conducted by the Stanford Center on Longevity. And they talked about the life-altering implications of retirement. And the 3 biggest areas, of course, are finance, health, and your psychological well-being. All 3 are usually greatly impacted by a decision to retire. I'm going to be sharing with you in my part of the session some of what I found out. And so we're going to come back to these 3 factors. In terms of retirement planning, here's some of the frightening statistics. And you'll see the resources throughout the slides as well at the end. I hope they're at the end. But the average American spends 20 years in retirement. To me, that's kind of eye-opening. I have a hard time seeing myself retired. On the other hand, that's a good chunk of time. So what am I going to do with it? About 51% of Americans retire between the age of 61 and 65. Now that's considering all Americans. That's not necessarily rehab counselors. So keep that in mind. Notably, 56% of workers retired sooner than they had planned. That kind of jumps out at me as the, better have a plan, because you might end up retiring sooner than you think you would. Some more frightening statistics. 1/4 of Americans do not have any retirement savings. That's really frightening. I don't know what's going to happen for those folks. Nearly 70% of Americans are concerned they don't have enough money for retirement. And then related to that, only 40% of Americans have calculated how much they need to save for retirement. So only 40% have put pencil to paper, I'm trying to say, and done some numbers. The Department of Labor recommends 70 to 90% of your pre-retirement income is what you would want to have to live on after you retire. And there was also another stat I found: in households managed by people older than 65, they spend around $45,800 annually or $3,800 monthly. So it gives you some ideas of what's going on out there now. Here's some more frightening statistics just to get your attention. 50% of Americans age 65 or over have an annual income lower than 24,200. Now, we all know that's pretty low, and we're not used to living on that. And I would hate to think that hearing that we wouldn't begin to make some plans. The median annual pension ranges, this is pension, ranges from $9,200 to $22,002. That's not a very high pension. Now, often pensions will come with benefits, so that might be helpful. If you put a dollar value to the benefits, they can be pretty high. I know when I retired from teaching around 2015, I put a dollar value to benefits close to $40,000 by the time all the benefits were covered. And I don't have all those benefits, but some of those benefits after I left there. And the last frightening statistics is about 46% of homeowners ages 65 to 79 now have mortgage debt. I suspect that percentage has increased over the past few decades. There's more single people, there's more divorce, there's more mobility within your career. So it's not that unlikely that if you relocate or go through whatever life event you go through, that you find yourself with a mortgage even though you're retired. Now, here's some not so frightening statistics. I don't want to have everyone very scared. 91%, this is all from this same source, 91% of those in retirement state they are generally happy. So I'm glad we have happiness to look forward to. 71% say their health is excellent or good. That's really good news, because things change really quick when your health takes a dive. And most retirees spend more time with family and friends. I consider that good news too. I think that's what we all would like to do when we retire, not necessarily, but like to. So I wanted to end with some not so frightening statistics. And then I added this slide because I don't know about you, but sometimes when it comes to preparing for retirement or transitioning, that's how I feel. I've got a long way to go. Where am I going to start? How am I going to catch up? And I'm running as fast as I can. You know, I meet with my accountant, and this is usually the state I'm in afterwards. Oh man, I got all this catching up to do. A lot of us aren't as in bad shape as we think, but we never know. So if you're in this state, don't panic, come out of panic mode. Things can get better. So I'm going back now to those 3 implications that Stanford found, the 3 major life-altering implications of retirement. And I'm suggesting you take those 3 aspects and pose them as questions to yourself now as you're beginning to think about retiring. For example, what is my financial condition? That is typically the aspect of retirement we focus on the most, and understandably. Nothing is worse than not having the income that you thought you would have at some point. So if you're self-employed and your income is waxed and waned, you know what that's like. You have a quarter where your income, your profits are low, but you still have the same expenses at home, same amount of money to run your office. It's a pretty big question. However, there are 2 other questions to ask yourself, and they're actually quite important questions that can play a huge factor in when you decide to retire. What is my current health? Is there anything coming that health-wise that makes me want to retire early. For example, if you know that you've got a chronic progressing health condition, you might want to retire early. Maybe you have a chronic health condition, but it's not progressive. Maybe it stays stable and you stay in a certain situation. If that's the case, then you might feel comfortable delaying retirement as long as you want to delay it. And then psychological well-being. I think this is probably the factor that I hear the most about when I look in the literature or when I talk to other professionals, including accountants and attorneys and all those people that you get involved when you're trying to make a retirement plan. How will retirement impact me emotionally? Do I have another identity other than work? Do I have leisure interest? Do I have friends outside of work? A lot of us have developed most of our friendships in our careers. And sometimes we contain them within the career. Sometimes it goes outside. It's a huge issue. When I worked in the rehab unit of Lourdes Hospital in Paducah, Kentucky, a long time ago in the early 80s, one of the biggest issues we had with male patients that were close to or of retirement age is a huge dive in their psychological well-being after a change in health. Of course, if let's say someone had a major stroke, it was very obvious, what those changes were. Maybe they couldn't speak well anymore, or their short-term memory was gone, or comprehension changed. But even those fellows and some women, now it would probably be more women, but then it was more men. Some fellows would have just a mild stroke, hardly noticeable by someone who knew them when they interacted with them, and not noticeable at all by someone that didn't know them. But it still affected their psychological well-being and their self-confidence in their career. And a lot of the people that I worked with did not have leisure interests. I actually developed a class and taught it called Leisure Education. And this is for the people that came into the rehab unit whose life had been altered enough that they either were going to change to part-time or no work. And it was a very interesting experience to do that. So I strongly encourage you to take a look at those three factors and give them equal time. Don't think about just the finance. You can have all the money in the world, but if you don't have your health, I know all our grandparents said that, you don't have anything. And if you're not emotionally prepared, you will have a very rough transition or possibly a poor outcome. So don't ignore that either. Those three factors were put into this matrix by Stanford, and they are factors that they are calling the influencing the decision to hire. And if you look across the top, you see financial health and psychological well-being. There's the factors. If you look on the vertical axis, you will see the mechanism by which those factors can influence retirement. Some factors push us closer to retirement. Some factors pull us back a little bit. We say we don't want to do that. Some factors can actually be a barrier to retirement. Doesn't matter how much you're pushed. If there's a barrier, you got to figure out how to overcome it. And some factors are enablers. They will enable one to make that retirement leap. Some factors are triggers, and some factors override everything. So it's a really nice way to sort of comprehensively look at those three aspects. And I liked that. So I want to go through that quickly. For example, from a financial point of view, an economic recession may well push you to retire. Certainly, we all know people, I know when I was at the university, they would have periods where they would do buyouts, or at factories where they do buyouts to get people to retire early. Some of the in some ways, financial factors can pull you away from retiring. Maybe a buyout package isn't the right amount. The early retirement features aren't there. I'm sorry, I was looking at that incorrectly. Let me start over. They will pull you into retirement quicker. I already mentioned the buyout package or early retirement features. So they can pull you, they entice you forward. Some of the barriers, financial barriers, insufficient savings. Well, we all know that most Americans don't have enough. I don't know about most rehab counselors, vocational experts and life care planners, but many of us have had life changes that maybe dipped into, but not only prevented us from saving at the time, but dipped into our savings. I've experienced a major health setback that required that I restructure some things, and I had to dip into the savings to pay for what's called above reasonable and customary medical expenses multiple times. I experienced the loss of a spouse, so you lose the loss of the income, their share of retirement. Those types of things are going to happen, and it might not be your own fault. Sometimes it's difficult to convert savings to retirement income. There's regulations when you can start drawing on your IRA, depending on the type of IRA, that type of thing. A financial enabler is a pension. Someone who has a pension, like I said, I don't know if it was this session or maybe the previous session, but with a pension, you can get often some benefits like healthcare coverage, and that's big. Retirement work opportunities. Perhaps you don't have quite what you want to retire, but you don't really want to quit working all the way. So you work part-time. Triggers, Social Security eligibility. I've met a lot of people, and I'm sure you have too, in our line of work who they're close to Social Security retirement, depending on how long the rehab plan takes. They're like, I'm going to retire. I'm 62. I'm going to take what I've got and I'm going to go with it. Or their retirement plan eligibility. And then the overrider can be layoff or job loss. That just overrides the pushing, the pulling, the barriers, the enabling, and all of it. So let's look at health. Poor personal health can push you into retirement. We talked about this in the session I was in before. A fellow who had poor health, he was deteriorating. He wanted to sell his private practice. At the point at which he finally sold the practice, it was too far gone, and the buyer decided there wasn't going to be enough, it wasn't worth paying for it. So keep that in mind. Good personal health, that could pull you toward retirement. Let's say you've wanted to do something that requires some travel and really good health, and maybe you want to do it before you get any older. You might go earlier. A barrier, need to pay for care of a family member or lack of retiree health insurance. Those are two of the biggest barriers you actually find in our current society in our country right now. I have taken care of an ill family member twice, a spouse, and then before my parents passed, I moved both of them into my home and hired caregivers because I didn't want them to be in a nursing home. That's not cheap. I dipped into that savings a little bit. I told you there's times when I dip into things. An enabler is having health insurance. A trigger, Medicare or medical plan eligibility. Another overrider is a health shock, something you just don't plan on. It happens. You've got to deal with it. Psychological well-being, when you have an unpleasant or stressful work environment, you're more likely to be pushed to retire. Whereas if you value your leisure, you might be pulled into retirement. Fear of social loss can be a big barrier, especially if you haven't had much social life to this point. There are retirement readiness programs. I have not participated in one, but I am thinking about it because I think it might help. Trigger, birth of grandchildren. I'm sure you know many people who said, I want to retire, take care of my grandkids. Retirement of friends and relatives. A spouse retires, often influences another spouse to retire. Overrider is family disruption. Illness, death, divorce, large disruption can definitely change everything and override your decision. So I presented you this matrix because I think it's very helpful to look at those three questions and look at them a little more deeply, spend a little time contemplating that. My advice to you is to take stock, assess your health, value your company, develop and speak with your own financial and operation team. Have an attorney, an accountant or CPA, your personal financial advisor, whoever you want, whoever you feel like you need on board to develop your retirement plan. Don't go at it alone. We all think probably that we could, but it's probably better that we don't. Consider alternatives to full retirement. I suggest that because of my experience with people having sudden changes in their life and all of a sudden retiring and it not working for them. And that's not just health changes. And then make a plan. It's hard to make a plan, especially if the plan might have some negative connotation associated with it, like poor health or something. But without a plan, you probably don't know where you're going, and you don't know where you're going to end up. So I'll quickly tell you my story that's related to retirement planning. I haven't retired. I don't want to for a long time. I started in vocational evaluation and job placement and case management in the 80s. I've worked a lot in brain injury, inpatient acute care rehab, and workers' comp. I opened my own practice in 95, and I taught at a university for 22 years. I then had a medical disruption, we'll call it. I was on leave from 2013 to 15. In 15, I said, I'm going to retire. I could tell that the requirements to go from associate to full professor were going to have a negative impact on my health. And I didn't want to put myself in a position where I would have a negative impact on my health because I wanted so bad to be full professor. So I went ahead and retired with a small pension, but with health insurance and some other benefits. And then I began to ramp my practice back up from 2015 to present. And as part of ramping up, I have merged with Independent Rehab Services out of Naperville, outside of Chicago, effective January 2021. And one of the partners of that is Dave Patsavis, who's also presenting. My plan currently is to alternate between full-time and part-time work to accommodate remission and relapse. I'm lucky I can do that, and I'm thankful I can do that. And if you've got a chronic health condition, I encourage you to think about that. I know some people have contacted me individually outside of formal forums and said, hey, how are you still working, And so that's one way. Capitalizing on supervisory opportunities. If I have people on the ground doing work that I can do, that they can do, and something happens that I can't be there, someone's got my back. And if you're supervising, you can kind of do that behind the scenes. You don't necessarily worry about showing up at a certain place in a certain time. And that takes a lot of pressure off. My plan is to take stock at least annually, probably semi-annually, and adjust my plan accordingly. Things change, the economy changes. The current inflation rate and predicted inflation rate is frightening. There's just so many things we have to take into consideration. And then have a succession plan. If one of you happened to attend the last session, I really believe in succession planning or transition planning, and have an immediate plan and a long-term. Immediate, we're all getting older. We may or may not have health considerations. We need to have an immediate plan. In the last session, I spoke about our duty to our clients, our evaluees, the company that we have, that we own or work with or work for. We do have duties. And so you need to have that plan in place, and preferably in writing, and then the long-term plan too. I also want to share with you another experience I had with a company that closed suddenly. The person was a sole proprietor attorney who was 42 years old and had a chronic health condition, and he died suddenly. There were maybe 3 days of really poor health where he wasn't in the office, and then he passed. It was really quick. And a lot of us, if we look at how our practices run, they're kind of set up similar to a sole proprietor attorney. We have similar expenses. We have to get records. Hopefully someone else gets them for them, but sometimes we pay for them ourselves. We have clerical staff. We have different accounts that we're managing. It's rather complex. So in this situation, this fellow did not want to really make a succession plan. He didn't like to think about dying. None of us do. He knew it was potentially fatal. He didn't think it was going to happen, but it did. I was the person that then, as the executrix of his estate, was also responsible for the disposition of his firm. It was much more complex than you can imagine. There were several issues. First of all, there were over a couple hundred open active cases that needed to be finished. These were claimants. They may or may not have had hearings scheduled yet, or they might have been on appeal. I considered going into representation at that time because I was younger and that's not what I want to do, and I had to find a way to dispose of those files in an ethical and financially efficient way without delaying those files reaching conclusion. I found a firm not far geographically from where he was located, the attorney that passed, that specialized in Social Security Administration. And I went and spoke with them and said, I can't really have a split fee. That really wouldn't be ethical. And it looks kind of like a kickback, right? You got to be careful. So I took all of those files and I estimated the amount of work hours that he had put into them so that we could determine how much, once the case was settled, should go to the deceased attorney's estate. Well, to do that, it worked out well, but to do that meant I have to leave the estate open. And the estate, when it's open, is then vulnerable to liens. Luckily, the only liens that were filed were sort of just protocol liens that people wanted to make sure things were covered. They were covered. There was money within the firm to do that. But the estate stayed open 7 years before I could close it. And that was in some ways a stressful 7 years because I knew that some lien could come from somewhere, right or wrong. And I was worried about that. And luckily it didn't have a bad situation. So the money from those files went into the estate. There was a lot to do to transition those files. In my previous session, I talked about transition planning, some of the potential parts of it. It was huge. I was like working a part-time job in addition to teaching full-time and having 2 young children at that time. And it was hard. So if you have a succession plan, you actually would be very helpful to whoever takes over your situation if you are incapacitated or should pass away. So I wanted to end with what I consider sort of an obligatory happy ending. But if you plan ahead, I do feel like you can get a handle on these things. And as uncomfortable as it might be, it's a good idea to have a succession plan, a transition plan in the event of your demise or your incapacity, in addition to retirement planning. So that's where I'm going to end with my story. I don't know if Bob is ready to present or not. He's trying to join us. So let's see what's happening here.
I think Bob has joined you. Can you folks hear me?
He's here.
Yes.
We can.
Yeah, a little bit of a technological challenge, but we got it working. So hi, folks. Nice to see all of you. My only question is, where does my PowerPoint show up?
Would you like me to run it for you and you can tell me when you want to switch slides?
Oh, that would be perfect. That would be
Okay.
great. So thank you very much.
You're welcome. Give me 2 seconds. Just make sure to tell me when you're ready for the next slide so I advance it for you.
Yeah, let's just start at the beginning. I think everybody knows. I appreciate your help, Les.
Sure.
I think everybody knows why we're here. This is the title of our presentation. So crawl, walk, or run to retirement. In my particular case, it I think has captured all 3 verbs. So Les, if you could go to the next slide, I think that's a great way to
Yes.
start.
Okay.
One of the big questions that we all have to confront, though, on an individual specific basis, though, is, are you sure that you want to consider what I'll refer to as a transition to retirement as opposed to a snap decision? But are you sure? If so, what's driving the decision? Next slide, please. As has been discussed, and I suspect I wasn't able to attend the prior session, but health concerns clearly can be a reason why we're looking to make this change in our personal work status. Other reasons can also play the role or be the driver. For many of us, right at the bottom, I think says it all. As I get older, it's harder to do what I once did. And I'm not necessarily talking personally, but most of us, I think, will agree that the older we get, cognitively, physically, are we able to work the 70 hours a week, 52 weeks a year that we did when we started our business or started working as an expert? So it's a reality. As I get older, it's harder to do what I once did. Next, please. So what are my options if health issues are in fact driving my decision to consider retirement? Or rather than retirement, maybe we can just look at it as a change in work status. If we were to adopt workers' compensation parlance, are we talking about temporary total disability, permanent total disability? What are we talking about? But there have to be there are many options that we have available to us. Go to the next slide, please. Most people who I talk to view this transitional period and they look at it as an all or nothing decision. I don't feel like I can do what I did when I was younger, so I'll just retire. I think people who think in that mindset realize that's not really practical. But I don't feel like I can do what I did when I was younger, but I really don't feel like I have any other options. So if I'm not going to just retire, I guess I'll just continue working, right? I don't endorse either of those solutions. In fact, I don't see them as solutions. Rather, I think there is a middle ground. So let's talk about that. What is the middle ground? We can go to the next slide, please. So one of the driving concerns or questions that we have to ask ourselves, and I hope we can answer ourselves candidly, is can I still be an effective expert? Now I'm going to attack this question from the standpoint of being an expert, not being a case manager, not being necessarily a life care planner, although life care planners, of course, are experts. But can I still be an effective expert? Am I still physically or cognitively capable of doing expert witness work to the standards I've set for myself, that the industry demands, that colleagues expect of me, and more important than that, probably the referral sources who have supported me over the years? Can I meet their expectations anymore? So the question then becomes, if not, should I limit my work maybe to that of a consultant and let someone else serve as a designated expert? That is, take my expert hat off, but become someone who works up the case for the expert as an alternative. And go to the next slide, please. That decision requires you to look at what your personal practice is. How is it organized? Are you the key man or woman who's expected to do it all and be the testifying expert? If you're the business owner, do you have other employees or colleagues who could serve as a testifying expert if your role were to change? And if you're going to be facing that, how would you feel about that? You know, for those of us who started our own company, you know, that's myself included, I started vocational diagnostics in 1984. And I always forget to add the Inc. I guess we have to add INC after the business name. I started this company in 1984. And yes, lived off the credit cards for the longest time, built a business, established the relationships, and it's been, of course, extremely gratifying. But still, I was expected to do it all. So let's go to the next slide. And we'll talk about this a bit more to kind of come up with maybe some alternatives. So If you're looking at making this decision to transition to something else, you're not looking to be, the chief cook and bottle washer. You just need to find something else as part of your practice. But what do you do? Do you sell it? Easy question to ask, but is there an easy answer? If you want to get out, so to speak, who do you sell your practice to? Excuse me, and how do you identify a potential buyer? Now, once you do that, the next question is, does my practice have any value? If so, how's that determined? If the answer is no, why doesn't your practice have any value? One of the biggest and most important mantras to consider, though, is that we're never worth to others what we're worth to ourselves. And that goes beyond just getting the paycheck every day. We're talking about self-image. We're talking about professional identity. Nobody can replicate what we've done for ourselves. So I think we need to get in touch with these qualitative issues before we work simultaneously with addressing the quantitative issues. So let's go to the next slide. The biggest problem, though, is that your practice is just that, you. There are unique problems with valuing personal service companies. So if you are looking to transition or to get out, do you have an asset that is worth something to someone else? Well, you need to retain an expert in the valuation of such companies to determine whether or not you in fact have an asset that you can dispose of. You need to retain an expert in the valuation of such companies. However, as you go into this, realize the typical value will likely be shocking to you. Going back to the issue of we're never worth to others what we're worth to ourselves. Next slide, please. Little discussion about typical valuation models for those who have not gone down this path before. One of the biggest driving forces is what's known as EBITDA, earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. That model or that approach may work for valuing companies with employees or publicly traded companies. Does it work for a sole practitioner? Let's face it, the survey that we're all familiar with identified most people that do what we do are sole practitioners. I started that way and then quickly realized that there's more value to me, to the company, if I had employees or contractors. So you need to look at your personal situation. So does EBITDA work for professional service firms? What do professional service firms sell for if you go down the sales path? Sales multiples typically range from 1.3 to 2.2 times revenues, depending on profitability. And that's a big issue. Professional service businesses can be highly profitable. Profit margins, due to a lack of overhead, can range from 15 to 30%, according to the research, that is 15 to 30% of revenues. And as a comparison, accountancy and law firms are primarily acquired for the value of their existing clients, not necessarily the work that you personally do, but for the value of the clients, or what I would call them referral sources. We have to be careful when we use the term client in our field. Next slide, please. This is why the first thing that you need to do, and I heard Les talking about this earlier, you need to have your financial and operations team in place. You need to have an attorney, you need to have a CPA, and you need to have a personal financial advisor who may or may not be involved with your practice. My personal feeling is that your personal financial advisor has to be involved in your practice if you're looking at transitioning out of an active practice into more of a retirement mode. Next slide, please. What retirement planning have you done? And this should have been perhaps an earlier slide. Are you financially able to even considering retiring or a change in your business model or personal approach? What have you personally done to address this? We could probably do an entire presentation on how you would go about making the personal decision to focus on some change. We don't have the time today, and that's a presentation for another day or another conference. Next slide, please. One of the things that I personally believe in, though, is that there are alternatives to full retirement. And what I want to talk about here is something that people may have thought about, but I think they're probably terrified of confronting or just really getting in touch with. I personally believe that if you are looking to transition from out of a full-time professional practice towards retirement, it's essential that you establish a business relationship with a colleague or colleagues to begin the divestiture of your business and transition to leaving your existing practice. And here's a key: while continuing to work to some extent. How many people believe in the light switch approach to business management? You know, it's a light switch, it's on or off. It doesn't really work that way, and I don't think anybody would disagree. So my personal suggestion is, when you're looking to make that transition or start the transition, when you're ready, decide on what you are going to do or would like to do. Have that relationship in place, and I'll explain in a minute what I did personally. It was somewhat unique, but maybe not as unique as we might think when I start telling my story. But start to limit your case referrals, assuming that you have this transitional strategy in place. Consider working for only your most desirable referral sources, and that can be both quantitatively and qualitatively. You may enjoy working for some referral sources that don't generate a lot of business for you or a lot of revenue, but maybe you really enjoy the work. So this is a highly personal decision that you really have to consider. If you start to limit the work that you do, though, this will eventually result in what I call a natural retirement outcome. But there is a big but attached to this. The plan requires discipline. Stick to your plan. And I'm kind of laughing about this because, you know, the people in the firm that I work for now, I don't own my company anymore. And we'll talk about that. But, you know, my colleagues at Vocational Diagnostics laugh regularly at the question of, what is Bob doing this week or this month? Is he moving towards retirement, or is he taking cases? Is he working more this month than he was last month, or will work next month? You have to be disciplined in what you decide for yourself works best for you. My suggestion is, though, limit the work that you do and pursue the transition to full retirement. Do not be afraid to send the message, not just to colleagues, but your referral sources, that you're serious about making this transition. You have to do that. It's the hardest thing that I've faced, but you have to do it. Next slide, please. So here's my personal story, and a lot of you know this. I mean, I've been involved with Iarp for decades. I'm a past president of Iarp, and you know, I'm privileged that I keep getting asked to present at conferences and the like, and if I didn't enjoy it, I wouldn't be doing it. But we had to realize that getting on in age, and I'm very vocal about the fact I just turned 70 in March. So I go back a couple of years to January 1st of 18, and the plan was actually in place long before that. But I'm very privileged to have as my daughter Aubrey Corwin, who is now the president and chief executive officer of Vocational Diagnostics, Inc. Aubrey and I started this plan when she came into the business a dozen or so years ago. I think we both knew that we would wind up where we wound up. So Aubrey is an accomplished vocational expert and life care planner. We started working on this plan with the assistance of other professionals over a period of 2 years before 18. So it's back in 15 or 16 that we started working towards this. And believe me, it was difficult for me to get in touch with giving up what I had established in 1984. And I think everybody who's in this position is going to appreciate that. But we did it. I continue to be involved in the business, but I'm now an employee. I don't have an ownership stake. I don't have any involvement in the day-to-day operations of the business, but I continue to work cases. I continue to testify to a limited extent, but I'm clearly not doing what I did when I founded the business in '84. Next slide, please. So here's what I've personally decided to do, and I think it's working for me. It's been a bit of a battle over the last couple of years, but I've had to be disciplined, and I've decided that I'm going to be limiting the cases that I'm accepting going forward. I'm now taking very few cases and only the ones that I want to work on. And that means the referral sources who have been good to me over the years, I continue to work to a large extent with them and with them only. But I continue to take new cases. And we had a chuckle earlier today when I got an email from what I would refer to as an East Coast referral source of mine, who I worked with extensively for many, many years. But you know, I made the decision years ago that I wanted to stop doing those cases. But you know, it's the gift that keeps on giving, right? You just can't walk away. You never know what that next email or phone call is going to bring. So I continue to testify, but I don't do it as often. I enjoy testimony. It is more challenging than it used to be, but that keeps me fresh. It really energizes me. I take a lot away from being able to continue to testify, sit for a deposition. Yes, I can survive a deposition, 4 hours or so, but let's not kid each other. I don't enjoy it like I did years ago when I was doing it more. I enjoy my role, which is a supporting role, helping teach younger staff, helping teach Iarp colleagues. You can go to the next slide. I was one of the first folks to be involved with the Iarp mentoring program. I still have people who call me, email me. My professional life has been an open book, and to the extent that I can continue to give, I welcome that. What does my personal future hold? I anticipate at this stage in 2021, full retirement within 2 years or earlier, and that considers my current role. I am welcoming the change. So I've decided not to take cases, and that sounds like an absolute statement, so I think we should soften that a little bit, because who knows what I'll decide tomorrow. But if a case is on a track towards trial or case resolution more than 2 years from now, and COVID has really pushed this calendar back, as we all know, but the odds are that I'm not going to be willing to accept the case if it's going to wind up in trial 2 years from now. I want to continue to be available for consultation with you folks, my Iarp colleagues. I continue to sit on the editorial review boards of the Rehab Pro and the Journal of Life Care Planning. I really enjoy this. So to the extent that the editors will welcome my involvement, that continues to be something I take a lot of satisfaction in. But that's what I want to focus on going forward. And who knows, Tanya, maybe I'll write more for publication than I have over the years. It's something I feel badly about, that I haven't done as much as I probably should. Next slide, please. whatever decision you make as an individual, it's very important that you find other interests to take the place of the expert work that you're doing now. This is, I mean, it's been for me personally the major challenge, as my work has very much been my identity over decades. So we have to realize that we have to substitute what we've done for so many years with something else. Next slide, please. So eventually, though, you're going to come into contact with what you need to do as an individual. So what I say is, eventually, just do it. And next slide, enjoy the drive. Some of our colleagues like to have strawberries. I think you know who I'm referring to. In my case, I'm very much a car person. I like fast cars. I don't necessarily drive illegally, but I've very much been active in the Porsche Club of America. That is a Porsche there in front of you. So it gives me a great sense of satisfaction to be able, oh, and I serve right now, can't get away from leadership, right? I was asked to run for, and I was then elected as the president of the Arizona Mountain region of the Porsche Club of America. So I'm now active regionally, nationally. It really gives me a lot of satisfaction. You can find that for yourself too. So thank you for listening. All my contact information is through Iarp, the Iarp website. Reach out to me if you have any questions at any time, and I'm happy to help you take the steps that I took and continue to need to take. So thanks, I appreciate it.
Thank you, both Bob and Les. Okay, so we have about, about 40 minutes or so, but if you have any questions for any of the panelists, you can add them to the Q&A, or you can send me any comments to the chat, and we'll be monitoring that as Dave presents. So don't feel like you have to wait to the end. If you want to go ahead and start populating that, we're here to receive them. Dave, it's all you.
All right, so we go from the red Porsche to the giant motorhome as to some of the crawl, walk, run, or drive. And my drive or goal is the motorhome. Maybe not that $500,000 motorhome, but I think, as Bob said, we all have to have our goals. And that's going to be one of mine as far as, traveling the country in retirement, if that ever comes. Les, next one. Part of my presentation is going to cover succession planning, how it ties into the CRC Code of Ethics, 10 reasons why companies pursue mergers, acquisitions, major reasons behind failures of such, framework of transitions, roles and responsibility, and then my story. A lot of what I have to say has been covered to some degree. Some of it may go into more detail, but each of our stories is a little bit unique. There's a lot of similarities, but it's always good to get some different thoughts. And I took some notes from both Les and Bob that I'll kind of review at the end. Next. Succession planning. To me, it's like an insurance. We have insurance for medical, dental, homeowners, rental insurance, car insurance, travel insurance, liability, professional insurance, workers' comp insurance. This is succession planning insurance. You need to make sure that you've got all your ducks in a row. If you're going to retire, and if you've got somebody else to take over, that helps with so many different avenues, as Les said, as to some of the problems that she's encountered, either on a personal note or through friends. A similar story, a younger attorney that I did a lot of work with, and he did mostly Social Security work up in Rockford, Illinois, and did some workers' comp. He was in his 50s and didn't show up at home one night. They found him in his office, slumped over a desk, and that was it. At 50, he probably figured that he didn't have to worry too much about that, but fortunate, he did have some contacts and some other attorneys that he worked with, but the distance between the two was about 6 hours. So it took, unless you talked about 7 years, this took about 3 to 5 years just to go through all the Social Security cases. And then he had to, hand off some of those. So look at your succession planning as an insurance policy on yourself, your loved ones, your business partners, co-workers, anybody associated with you. And also your clients, as we'll get into. Les, next one. Code of Ethics, most recently updated January of 2017. I'm going to read off a couple of those. Next. All right. Get to that. Termination referral, appropriate transfer of services. When a rehabilitation counselor transfers or refers clients to another practitioner, they make reasonable efforts to ensure that appropriate counseling services, administrative processes are completed in a timely manner, and that appropriate information records are communicated and or transferred to referral sources to facilitate smooth transition. That is our guideline. Those are ethics that we're supposed to do. And then we talk about functional competence as well. Impairment. We have counselors alert to signs of impairment due to their own health issues, personal circumstances, and refrain from offering or providing professional services when such impairment is likely to harm the client or others. Both Bob and Les have talked about, whether it's a medical condition, psychological condition, responsibilities, dementia, Alzheimer's. Those are all things that we have to be aware of. We're ethically responsible for our clients. We need to make sure that if something happens to us, that they are taken care of, that somebody else is there to pick up the ball. Just in Illinois, and I'll go for the last few years, we had a gentleman in central Illinois, tragic accident with his family, loss of life. There's not that many CRC rehab counselors in central Illinois. So all the attorneys that were working these cases were scrambling around to find, replacements. Who else can take the file? We got several of those calls, and I'm sure they were dispersed among other CRCs throughout the state. But the first time I received a call, the attorney wanted to know if I can just testify in the case based on the gentleman's prior work. And I'm like, I need to do my own evaluation. I can't just put a rubber stamp on that. And so there was the added cost to the client, to the insurance company, not the insurance company, but I guess it could be if it was the other way around. This was a petitioner attorney. So we never know what's going to happen. There's no guarantee. I had an old sign in my office, Walter Payton, tomorrow is not guaranteed to anyone. So we have to keep that in mind and be prepared. It's our obligation as a CRC. If we're following a code of ethics, we need to do that. Again, we're trying to do the best we can. As rehab counselors, we need to make sure that we have our clients back, whoever had made the referral to us. And that goes along, and I didn't put this in the thing, but it just pops into my head. When you're working with your group, whether you have other people in the office or who's ever going to be your succession person, make sure that they have all your information, all your passwords, access to all your files, keys to every file cabinet. Those are all things that we don't think of necessarily, but they're important. For many years, I was on my own, but for the last 5 to 6 years, then I started with contractors. In the last 5 years, I began having employees. In the last 5 years now, well, last 10 years, started with one individual, Kathy Mueller, who's now president of the company. We started that transition 5 years ago. I'll go into more details there. Next slide, Les. Sorry about that. This was from 2020, I'm sorry, from 2010. The only difference in there, and the reason I pulled this one out, toward the end, rehabilitation counselors prepared to disseminate, identify colleagues or records custodian, a plan for transfer of clients and files in the case of incapacitation, death, or termination of practice. And again, that's what happened with one individual down in Southern Illinois. They didn't plan for that. And I'm not sure, again, I'm not on the CRC committee, unless you may be able to identify. I'm not sure why that particular one was taken out from 2010. I thought that's more appropriate than the more recent one. All right, next, Wes. We talk about 10 reasons why companies pursue mergers and acquisition. It could be, most of those reasons could be individually. Diversify operations. Do you want to offer more services? Do your competitors have certain services that you don't offer? You can diversify operations. You can add different offices. You can recruit different members. For instance, Les and I were able to combine resources and have a second office of independent rehabilitation services located down in Carbondale. And Les's expertise is a little bit different than ours. She had more work in Social Security. We've never offered that. Les had more experience with vocational testing. We didn't offer that. So it goes down to number 5, cross-selling, offering more services, more products to existing customers. Creating more value for the company. As you have more resources, you offer more services, the value of your company increases. And again, it goes with expansion. Having 2 locations instead of 1, being able to cover the whole state pretty much. When somebody calls from Central Illinois, we can determine which office is located closer to them, and we bill out of that office. Cash flow. Again, it may not happen right away, but eventually your expectation is to have increased cash flow. Replacing leadership, and that's one of the aspects as far as that's happening with retirement and or combination of combining different companies. There may be some cutting the costs as far as some cost savings, as far as services costs, publications, membership, things like that. And the other aspect is just surviving the changes that may occur. Next, Les. There are many reasons for failures behind mergers and acquisitions. The data could be incorrect valuation. There's one of the resources to identify what a company is worth. They talk about intrinsic value. I know, Bob, you covered some other areas, but overpaying for a business is one of the major reasons for failure. Again, we probably value our own company or corporation more so than what it may be worth. We had an individual many years ago who was trying to sell her business based on the fact that the state owed her a lot of money. And she said, well, if you buy the business, you'll eventually get this. Well, eventually have a lot of headache trying to get the money that you weren't able to get. So you have to kind of look in between the lines and make sure that it's a good decision. And again, use the resources that Bob talked about as far as financial planner, a CPA, an attorney. Limited resource. Again, you may have big plans, but do you have the resources to make that expansion? Can you cover all those goals and objectives that you've lined out? Don't bite off more than what you can chew. Ever-changing economic factors. We need to know nothing more than what happened with COVID-19. How many people were affected? And those factors nobody else could have predicted that would have happened and shut down. We recently moved right before COVID into a new building, which is located in part of the NIU campus in Naperville, Illinois. For the longest time, I was the only person in the building. School was closed, no students, no teachers, no janitorial service, nothing. It was kind of a ghost town. So you never know what may happen as far as economic factors. Next. Framework of transitions. That is a big one as far as, what we all have our own goals, objectives, what we think will work for us. I've been in transition for the last 5 years. When Bob talked about discipline, that rang home more than anybody can imagine, because I've been trying to cut back for the last 5 years and it doesn't seem to work too well. And that's a lack of discipline on my part. I didn't anticipate growing the business. I didn't anticipate the number of referrals coming in. So you have to understand, you can have a framework, you can have an idea what you think you want to do, but you have to be adjusted. You have to be flexible to whatever may happen, whether it's COVID-19, whether it's an opportunity for further expansion, whether you start branching out into different services that you never thought about. We had one individual outside of Chicago that handled most of the divorce cases through the northern part of the state. She decided to retire. All of a sudden, what was all going into one funnel now was dispersed. People were able to obtain some of that work. So again, something that wasn't anticipated, expected, but we were able to make that adjustment. Les, you can. Let me go to that for a second. Teaching, training. That part of the transition is understanding, for me anyway, making sure that the person taking over for my corporation, which I had since 1990, was to make sure that she was prepared, to have as many certifications, licenses, expertise as possible. So that meant more seminar training, more exposure to different certifications. Not only Kathy Mueller is now president of the company, she expanded within that into doing therapy work, a licensed practical counselor here in Illinois. So she didn't want to put all the eggs in one basket. So she received training in different areas and started that. So again, it's your willingness to expand and not having it the same song that maybe it was 30 years ago. Business model is pretty much what you want to make of it. Company plans for making a profit, expansion of services locations, market, customers, geographic, 3 different business models tied into one. Willing to accept changes, challenges on both sides. What I call, and this is one of the areas that, again, as Bob talked about, discipline, and that is, I think there's a need, we may expand to this, retirement therapy. As you go through retirement, challenges that you have that I'll speak on a personal level, the business is what I identified myself with. This is, I've gone into different areas as far as interest, running, things like that. There's always grandkids, but you can't spend 24/7 doing other things. And a lot of times, working 70, 80 hours a week was the norm. The last few years, as I get older, that's not possible. But having the role change as far as having somebody else take over the business, the push and pull, making sure that you walk a fine line, making sure that you're able to kind of let go of things. Within the last year, I'm now CEO founder. Kathy Mueller is now president. Les has been part of our team, and she sees some of the challenges that go in with staff meetings that we had. I finally had to pull out a little bit because it dawned on me that the company needed one voice, not 2 voices. And sometimes the 2 voices were confusing. And so again, accepting the change, negotiating duties, knowing the resources, those are all important aspects as far as the challenges that I had to overcome. Next, Les. So we all have a unique way of getting into this business. I started in mental health, Illinois Department of Mental Health, Chicago Read Henry Hornets, working with developmentally disabled children, adolescents, and mentally ill, and then psychiatric hospitals. And when I was with the state, we had, in Chicago, there was a institution that had both the Chicago public school systems and the state of Illinois Department of Mental Health. My supervisor was the director of voc ed. In order to have her position, you needed to have a master's in COC. I had no idea what a COC was. But at that point, she was ready to retire within a year or two. I had taken some master courses, but it needed commitment to work full-time and to go for my graduate degree. I had about a year and a half left in 1 year full-time. So once I got that, I was able to get the position, but then there were layoffs when at the state. I got bumped out because I was one of the youngest people. So then I went to private psychiatric hospitals, and then I got called from a rehab firm, wanted to know if I wanted to be, since I had a COC, if I wanted to work worker compensation files. I had no clue what it was. So my first day on the job was when I came back from Super Bowl '86, the Bears in New Orleans beating the Patriots, and I worked privately with 2 other firms for a couple of years and then started my own. No regrets. There's been the challenges, blood, sweat, and tears, but the company is who I identify. You know, the colleagues that I've met over the years through the different conferences, Iarp, ABVE, National Rehab Association, that to me is priceless. No matter how much money has been made or the lean years, things like that, retirement, none of it is worth as much as the interaction, the friends, the colleagues, the experiences that I've had, making a difference in people's lives. So my last slide is my difficulties is letting go and being disciplined. Those are my challenges ahead of me. But that's pretty much my presentation.
Perfect. Thank you all. Oh, I'm getting a little feedback. Are you?
Not so much.
All right, let's try that again. Okay. Any questions that anyone wants to ask of the panelists, feel free to type those into the Q&A. If you have any comments that you want to make, feel free to include that in the chat. We'll be monitoring that. I love the information you all have shared. I know some of it was personal, and I appreciate you doing that. It's not the type of information we can all find in textbooks. And so I appreciate your expertise in this and your experience. I love the concept of entertaining both financial and professional and existential contemplations around this. That was not something I had really thought about before. I have a question myself, and I don't know which one of you wants to take this, and I'll man the questions as you're answering mine. As in terms of business valuation, I'm wondering how you go about finding someone to do that, particularly because what we do is so unique. I'm just kind of curious where somebody would go to find a professional like that.
Bob, you want to go first?
Yeah, I can address that. I think the best place to start would be, excuse me, would be if you have a financial consultant who you work with. I mean, maybe someone who manages investments, someone who you have a trusting relationship with, who understands what you do. They're the ones who usually have their ear to the financial market, the world. You know, they're really the ones who I think can help you start to network or can take the lead. That's what I did. I mean, I identified some people, and one person led to another. Your attorney probably will have somebody who they can refer you to. But again, it really is an individual decision, but the expertise is there. You just have to scratch below the surface and identify folks. And someone may not have the answer right away. but they can refer you to someone who would then perhaps know someone else who would know someone else. So that's what I would suggest.
Okay. I have heard, and I don't know if you talked about this today, but I have heard from other people who've retired that it typically took them about 5 years to actually work cases to fruition and become testify, you know, get from when they had worked the case up until when they actually testified. And sometimes that bridged over from their pre-retirement to their post-retirement years. Any thoughts on that?
Well, my thought is we have a duty or an obligation to see cases through to the end, if at all possible. I know sometimes it's not possible, and you have to transfer the case, but I just feel like we have a duty to do that. So to stop accepting cases and set your target date and slow down makes sense, but know that you can't stop completely unless it's a very unusual circumstance. I prefer to see them through to the end, and that's what I'd recommend. I think it's the most ethical way to approach it, at least.
And I think it's important, even if you're ready to retire, going to retire, to maintain your certification.
Yeah.
I don't, as long as you're around and you have your health, both physical and mental, I think that it's important to maintain your certifications.
That's a really good point. I think many of our certifications allow for retirement status, and I don't think that means you formerly worked in this field. It means you do X number of hours or fewer per year, as I understand that. And that may not be for all of the certifications, but that's certainly something we probably need to also mention and take a look at. Okay, I am not having any questions coming in, which means, of course, that you did a perfect job. People are complimentary and say thank you and for the helpful and informative information. For anybody who wants to listen to it again, my understanding, of course, is that this is being recorded and it will be posted. And my understanding is that should happen around the first week in December, and it will remain up for a period of about 3 months or so.
Tanya, my understanding, they have our contact information as well.
The attendees. Yes, sir.
Okay, so again, I'll put out on my behalf, if anybody has any questions, feel free to contact me directly.
Thank you guys again. Really, really appreciate your expertise in this. And I know, Les, you've been at this for hours today. So big thanks for you. And
no problem. Thank you.
I appreciate everyone who attended, and I'm so excited that we have, I don't know if anybody else has mentioned this, but we have a record number of people registered for this conference this year.
Right. Congratulations.
I'm
That's awesome.
Thrilled that so many members are willing to just hang in there with us. Maybe hopefully one more year we'll be back in Texas. All right. Thank you guys. Everybody have a good evening.
Thanks, Tanya. Bye now.